The first thing Admiral Severin Tao noticed about the human star was its color. It was yellow, a simple, unremarkable yellow, the kind of star his species had catalogued 10,000 times and never bothered to revisit. He stood on the cracked observation deck of the Veyrathel, his flagship, watching that small yellow sun grow through a viewport webbed with hairline fractures. Behind him, the bridge groaned. Somewhere below decks, a coolant line was hissing itself empty into vacuum. Somewhere else, a junior officer was crying very quietly into the sleeve of her uniform. They had been running for 9 months. Of the 472 ships that had fled the outer reach, 103 remained. Of the crews aboard those ships, less than half still drew breath. The rest were stacked in cargo holds because the Vethari did not abandon their dead, even when their dead outnumbered the living. "Distance to the third planet?" Severin asked. The navigator did not lift her head. 11 hours at current burn, Admiral, if the engines hold. If the engines hold. That phrase had become a kind of prayer aboard the Veyrathel. It was whispered before sleep, murmured during meals, scratched into bulkheads beside the names of the dead. The engines had not held for many ships. The Cairneth had cracked in half 3 weeks ago. The Alothi had drifted into a moon's gravity well and pulled itself apart trying to escape. Severin had watched them die through telescopes, unable to do anything but log their final transmissions. He turned from the viewport. Open a channel to the third world, wideband, translate into every language their atmosphere is broadcasting. The communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, our records of this species suggest they are pre-FTL. They may not even. They have radios, they have satellites, they will hear us." Severin straightened his torn coat. "Tell them we come in surrender." The word tasted like rust. The Vethari had never surrendered to anyone. They had built cathedrals of crystal in the rings of dying gas giants. They had composed symphonies that lasted centuries. They had walked into the dark between stars and called it home for 10,000 years. And now they were begging mercy from a species that, by all the careful and condescending notes in the Coalition archives, still buried its dead in the ground. The channel opened. For a long minute there was nothing. Severin felt his second heart stutter against the first. Perhaps the humans truly were too primitive. Perhaps they would respond with worship, or war, or, worst of all, with silence. Then a voice came through. It was calm, measured, and spoke in flawless Vethari court standard. "Vethari vessel," it said. "This is Earth coordination. We have been tracking your approach for 6 days. Your fleet is breaking apart. Permission granted to enter our system. We are dispatching tugs and medical ships to your position. Do not attempt to slow your burn, let us come to you." Severin's mouth opened, closed, opened again. How he managed. "How do you speak our language?" There was the briefest pause. Then the voice, a woman's voice, he realized, warm with something that might have been amusement, answered. "We've been listening to your broadcasts for 40 years, Admiral. We thought it would be polite to learn." The channel held. Through it, Severin could hear other voices in the background, chatter, the clatter of equipment, the urgent hum of a civilization that had been preparing for this moment without ever announcing it to the galaxy. He looked back at the viewport. Earth was no longer a yellow star's third pebble. It was a blue jewel swelling fast, and from its surface a glittering swarm of ships was rising to meet him. Not warships. Not yet. Small, ugly, utilitarian things, boxy and bristling with grappling arms and welding rigs and lights. They looked, Severin thought, like something a child would draw if you asked them to imagine a tool that could fix anything. The first of them reached the Veyrathel an hour later. A human in a battered pressure suit pressed his gloved hand to the hull, leaned close to a camera, and grinned through his visor at the alien admiral on the other side. "Hey, friend," the human said. "Looks like you've had a rough trip. Let's see what we can do." The humans came aboard before the Vethari finished, deciding whether to let them. That, more than anything else, was what Severin would remember in the years to come, the casual, almost cheerful efficiency of it. While the Vethari Council deliberated, while protocol officers drafted welcome statements, while linguists prepared formal greetings, a hatch on Deck 12 simply opened, and a six-person human crew walked through it carrying toolboxes. They were not soldiers. They wore patched coveralls and helmets stickered with the insignia of something called the Houston Yard. They were arguing among themselves about whether the Veyrathal's plasma conduit ran on a closed or open loop. One of them was eating from a foil packet. "Admiral on deck," someone shouted, and Severin rounded a corner to find this small herd of humans frozen mid-step. The one with the foil packet swallowed quickly. Hi." Her name, he would learn, was Maya Cortez. She was 28 Earth years old. She had been a shipyard welder before Earth coordination had quietly tapped every skilled hand on the planet for what she called the alien thing. She held out a gloved fist toward him, then realized he had no idea what to do with it, and instead bowed, clumsily, but with care. "Sorry, Admiral," she said. "We didn't mean to startle you. The hull team said your starboard hangar was venting. We just sort of," she gestured at the corridor, "came in to fix it." Severin stared at her. "You came in to fix it?" "That's the job, sir." He had prepared a speech for the humans. It was a fine speech. It spoke of ancient sorrows and desperate hope, of one civilization kneeling before another. He had practiced it in the mirror of his quarters until the words were smooth as glass. He did not give the speech. Instead, he heard himself say, "What do you need from us?" Maya thought about this. "Honestly, coffee if you've got it, and maybe a tour. We've got schematics from your broadcasts, but they're 40 years out of date and your hull's been patched a dozen times. We need to know what's actually under there." 3 hours later, Severin stood in the Veyrathal's weapons bay with a delegation of human engineers, and watched a senior specialist named Thomas Beck lift the casing off a Vethari plasma lance with the gentleness of a surgeon. Beck was old by human standards, gray-haired, bearded, his hands marked with the small white scars of a lifetime spent inside engines. He turned the lance's firing assembly over in his palm. He frowned. He frowned for a long time. "Admiral," he said finally, "may I ask a question?" "Of course." "This weapon, what does it do?" Severin blinked. "It is a plasma lance. It projects superheated." "No, sir." Beck shook his head slowly. "I mean, what does it do when you fire it at an enemy ship? What happens?" Severin searched for the words. "It disables their drives, forces them to disengage. Most coalition battles end with the losing fleet withdrawing under." "Sir," Beck set the firing assembly down very carefully on a workbench. "This thing couldn't punch through a coffee can. I've been looking at it for 10 minutes and I cannot figure out how it kills anything. So I'm asking you, sincerely, what is it for?" The bay went very quiet. Severin felt the question slide into him like a needle finding a vein. He thought of his sister, dead 3 years now, her cruiser dismantled in slow motion by the scour while her crew watched their disabling shots glitter uselessly off the swarm. He thought of the coalition's careful, ceremonial wars, where ships were crippled and crews were spared, and treaties were signed in incense and silver. He thought of how those rules had not survived contact with an enemy that did not know what rules were. "Thomas Beck," Severin said quietly, "I think you should sit down. There is something I need to tell you about the scour." Beck sat, so did Maya, so did every human in the room. For the next 2 hours, Severin spoke, and the humans listened without interrupting once. When he was done, Beck stood, walked the length of the weapons bay, and put his hand on the casing of the broken plasma lance. "All right," he said. His voice was flat, almost gentle. "We're going to need a bigger toolbox." The hook in his words was not a threat. It was a promise. And somewhere on the bridge, an alarm Severin had not heard in 9 months, a coalition alarm, the one that signaled resupply incoming, chimed for the first time as Earth's freighters began arriving in formation overhead. Earth ate the broken fleet alive. That was the only honest way Severin could describe it. Within 48 hours of the humans coming aboard, the Veirathal had been towed into a high orbital cradle above a continent the locals called Africa, and around her swarmed a constellation of human dockyards that had not, by every coalition survey of this primitive world, existed 3 months earlier. Severin watched from his observation deck as scaffolds extruded themselves from cargo platforms, as welders moved in mathematical formations, as the night side of Earth glittered with the orange constellations of forges working through the dark. "They built these for us," murmured his aide, Eerie Vale. The young ensign had not slept in 2 days. Her crest feathers had gone pale with exhaustion. "All of this, they built it for us." "No," said Severin, "they built it waiting for us. There is a difference." Eerie turned to him. "Admiral, they have been watching the galaxy for 40 years, listening, cataloging, and somewhere in those 40 years they understood before we did that the coalition was going to lose." Eerie said nothing. Outside the viewport, a new section of armor plating drifted past on the back of a tug, the human flag stenciled on it next to the Vethari crest. The 2 emblems were the same size. Severin wondered if anyone in the coalition would understand what that meant. Down in the gutted hangar bays, the work continued. The humans did not work the way the Vethari worked. There was no ceremony to it, no choreography of master engineers and apprentices, no songs sung over completed welds. Humans argued. They drank caffeinated mud out of dented cups. They labeled critical components with adhesive notes that said things like "Do not touch until Friday, TOMASZ." They worked in 3 rotating shifts and slept in hammocks strung between bulkheads, and when one of them made a mistake, the others gathered to mock the offender with what Eerie at first mistook for genuine cruelty, until she realized, with a jolt, that it was a form of love. They were, she decided, the loudest species she had ever met, and the fastest. On the 11th day, Maya Cortez found Eerie in a corridor with her forehead pressed against a cool bulkhead. "Hey," Maya tilted her head, "you all right?" Eerie did not lift her face. "I have been trying for an hour to comprehend what your people have done to the portside reactor." "Oh yeah," Maya's grin was audible, "we recorded." "You," Eerie turned, "you what?" "Recorded, pulled out the old reaction chamber, slotted in one of ours. Yours topped out at like 0.6 exawatts, ours starts at 4. We had to rip out half the conduit run because your buses would have melted, but the new ones are good. Promise." She paused, registering Eerie's expression. "Is that bad?" "It is not bad," Eerie said carefully. "It is, Maya. The reactor core was designed by the founders of our species. It is a sacred technology. It has not been altered in 11,000 years." Maya considered this. "Huh," she said. "Did it work?" "Did it?" 11,000 years and you guys are losing. So, did it work?" The corridor went very quiet. Somewhere far away, a welder shrieked against metal. Eerie opened her mouth, closed it. Then slowly she laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 9 months. It came out cracked and strange, like a sound her body had forgotten how to make, and once it started she could not stop. She laughed until tears beaded at the corners of her eyes, and Maya, alarmed, patted her on the shoulder with the awkward tenderness of someone who has never quite figured out how comforting works. "Sorry," Eerie gasped. "Sorry, I know, it did not work, it did not work." "Yeah," Maya's voice was soft. "Well, maybe ours will." On the 23rd day, they fired the first refitted weapon. Severin stood on the bridge of the Veirathal and watched a hollow asteroid, a tactical target the humans had towed in from the belt, disappear. There was no other word for it. One moment the asteroid was there, 3 kilometers of nickel iron, ancient and inert. The next, a line of light passed through it like a needle through silk, and the asteroid was a cooling cloud of gravel and vapor expanding into the dark. The bridge was silent. Then Eerie, very quietly, began to weep. "Admiral," whispered the gunnery officer, his voice shaking, "that was a calibration shot, at 12% power." Severin did not look away from the viewport. He could not. Somewhere on the far side of Earth, a human dockyard was already building the next weapon, and the one after that, and the one after that. And out beyond the Kuiper belt, 3 weeks at maximum burn, his long-range sensors had just chimed with the signal he had been dreading since the day they arrived. A single Scour scout had entered the system. The scout did not know it had been seen. That was the first gift the humans gave the Vethari, the gift of not being noticed. Earth's listening posts had been mapping the outer system for decades, and their sensor net was so dense, so deeply buried in the noise of cometary debris, that the Scour scout drifted into it the way a fish drifts into a net it cannot see. The humans tracked it for 6 hours before they even told Severin it was there. They wanted, Commander Elias Marsh explained to him in the war room, to be sure. "Sure of what?" Severin asked. Marsh was a small man for a human, wiry, dark-eyed, gray at the temples. He had introduced himself 2 weeks ago as the guy who's going to fly your ships, if that's all right with you. And Severin had not yet decided whether the human was being modest or simply telling the truth. "Sure, it's a loan," said Marsh. "If it's a scout, there's a doctrine. Doctrine means a pattern. Pattern means we can predict the next one." He tapped a hollow of the outer system. "And we will need to predict the next one because we are going to let this one go home." The room erupted. Vethari officers, the survivors of 9 months of running, of watching their friends die, of carrying the weight of a dying civilization on shoulders that had never been built for it, surged to their feet. Eerie Vale, standing at the back, watched it happen and felt something in her chest crack open. She had been thinking, in the quiet way one thinks of things one does not yet say aloud, that the humans understood her people better than her people understood themselves. Now she watched her admiral shout, and she knew she was right. Severin raised one hand. The room subsided. "Commander Marsh," he said carefully, "you wish to allow a Scour scout to escape this system, alive with reports." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Marsh did not flinch. "Because if it dies here, the Scour will know something killed it. They'll send a probe, then a swarm. They'll come carefully in numbers, and we will be fighting on their terms. But if it goes home with what it thinks it saw, a broken Vethari fleet, limping in orbit around a primitive world, then they'll come sloppy. They'll come hungry. They'll come the way wolves come to a wounded deer." He paused. "And by the time they get here, Admiral, we will not be a wounded deer." The silence that followed was the longest of Severin's life. He thought of his sister. He thought of his dead. He thought of every coalition doctrine he had ever been taught, the doctrines of ceremony, of measured response, of war as a kind of bloody conversation between civilized species. He thought of how those doctrines had murdered his people one elegant ship at a time. "Let it go home," he said. The scout left the system 3 days later, having watched the Veyrethel drift in apparent dereliction with her running lights dimmed and her hull artfully scarred. The humans had even arranged for one of her engines to vent atmosphere on a slow schedule, to suggest a coolant leak. Severin stood on the observation deck and watched the small Scour ship turn and burn for home, carrying its lie with it, and felt for the first time in 9 months something that was not quite hope, but was its close cousin. The reforging accelerated. Weapons the Vethari had no names for began to bloom along the hulls of their ships, coilguns the length of swimming pools, missile racks that could empty themselves in 9 seconds, beam emitters that the human engineers spoke of with a kind of reverent dread, as if they were not quite sure their own species should have built them. The Veyrethel's elegant white hull was striped now with the gray composite armor of Earth, and her bow had been rebuilt into something that looked, eerie thought, the first time she saw it from outside, less like a ship and more like a fist. On the night before the fleet departed orbit for the trap, Maya Cortez found Erie on the observation deck again. They had become something like friends in the way of people who work themselves to exhaustion side by side. Maya was carrying 2 cups of something hot. "Coffee," she said, offering one. Or, well, it's coffee for me. We made you a thing that's mostly safe. Eerie took the cup. She sipped. It was bitter and warm and tasted somehow like courage. Maya, she said, what if we lose? Maya looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked out the viewport, at the refitted fleet hanging in orbit like a row of waiting knives. Then we lose, she said, but we lose biting. Far away on the edge of the system, the second Scour scout did not arrive. It had been replaced, as Commander Marsh had predicted, by something much, much larger. The Scour came in a wedge of 43 ships, and they came expecting a feast. Severin stood on the command deck of the Veyrathel, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling, and watched the hollow bloom red. 43. He had not seen 43 Scour ships gathered in one place since the fall of the Outer Reach. The sight should have unmade him. Instead, he found himself listening to the human commander beside him, who was humming. Marsh was humming. It was a low, tuneless thing, the kind of sound a workman makes while threading a difficult bolt. He stood at the tactical table with his hands in his pockets and watched the Scour wedge advance, and he hummed, and every now and then he made a small noise in the back of his throat that Severin slowly realized was satisfaction. They're coming exactly where we wanted them, Marsh said at last, almost to himself. He looked up at Severin. Admiral, with your permission, I'd like to begin. You have it. Marsh turned to his bridge. He did not shout. He did not need to. All ships, he said. Phase 1 lights out. Across the fleet, every Vethari ship simultaneously cut its primary power signature. Reactors throttled to whispers. Heat sinks engaged. The fleet, refitted, armed, dangerous, vanished from Scour sensors like a candle pinched between two fingers. To the incoming swarm, the system suddenly contained nothing but a crippled flagship and a primitive blue planet. The wedge accelerated. They're committing, murmured Marsh. Good, 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 he tapped the hollow. Phase 2 bait moves. The Veyrathel, only the Veyrathel, alone, fired her engines and limped toward open space on a heading that screamed escape attempt. The Scour wedge altered course to pursue. Every instinct Severin had screamed at him to break formation, to call in support, to do anything other than watch his flagship walk into the jaws of 43 predators. He gripped the rail until his knuckles ached. Marsh did not move. Phase 3, he said, when the wedge had committed past the asteroid belt. Wake up. Across the system, the silent ships came back online. It was, Eerie thought later, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. 46 Vethari hulls refitted, rearmed, waiting, opened their eyes at the same moment, and the Scour wedge found itself bracketed on 3 sides by an enemy that had been there the entire time. The Scour did what the Scour always did. They charged. They had never been charged back. The first salvo from the refitted fleet was not measured. It was not ceremonial. It was a hammer blow delivered with every weapon the humans had bolted to Vethari hulls, and when the light cleared, 11 Scour ships were not there anymore. The remaining 32 faltered, actually faltered, Severin saw, their formation breaking in a way Scour formations had never broken, and Marsh, watching the tactical display, made a small noise like a man who has just been proven right. Phase 4, he said, carve them. What followed was not a battle, it was a lesson. The humans had taught the Vethari, in 3 weeks of brutal simulation drills, how to fight the way humans fought in pairs, in interlocking arcs, with one ship drawing fire while its partner stripped armor from the flank. The Vethari pilots, who had spent their lives flying the stately duels of coalition warfare, executed the new doctrine with the fierce overcompensation of converts. Scour ships died in flickers. They died in pairs. They died trying to retreat, and learned, for the first time in their species' long and devouring history, that retreat was now a thing that could be punished. It was over in 19 minutes. The bridge of the Veyrathel was silent except for the soft chime of damage reports, minor, all of them, the kind a shipyard could fix in a day. Severin stared at the hollow. 43 scour ships had entered the system. 0 were leaving it. His fleet had taken 3 hull breaches and a wounded pilot. He turned to Marsh. The human was still standing with his hands in his pockets. He looked tired. He looked, Severin thought, very small. "Commander Marsh," Severin said. His voice was not entirely steady. "I have a request." "Sir?" "The war against the scour. I am asking you to lead it." The bridge crew did not gasp. They had been waiting, Severin realized, for him to say it. Even Erie, standing at her station, had her hands folded as if in prayer. Marsh looked at the hollow for a long moment. Then he looked at Severin, and his eyes, dark and tired and a little sad, held something that was not pride but was older than pride. It was the look of a man who has been preparing for a job his whole life and has finally been asked to do it. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I accept, and I think it's time I told you how we end this." Marsh's plan was, Severin thought, the most human thing he had ever heard. They were gathered in the Varathal's war room, the surviving admirals of the coalition, 3 human commanders, Erie Vale in the corner with a tablet, and Marsh at the head of the table with a half-drunk cup of coffee in his hand. Outside, the refitted fleet was already moving. Inside, Marsh was explaining, in the calm and slightly apologetic voice of a man describing a regrettable but necessary household chore, how he intended to end a war that had been killing Vethari for 60 years. "We don't have the numbers to fight them," he said. "Not really. Even with everything Earth can build in the next year, we'd be outnumbered 9-1 in any sustained engagement. Attrition is their game, not ours." He took a sip of coffee. "So we don't play their game, we make them play ours. Once." He tapped the hollow. A red dot appeared at the edge of a star system Severin did not recognize. "Telmac 7, Marsh said. "Dead system. Brown dwarf, no planets, a debris field from a stellar collapse about 4 million years ago. Lots of dust. Lots of iron. Sensors don't work well there, too much interference. The scour avoid it because they can't see in it and they don't like things they can't see." "Then how?" asked Admiral Tessin, Severin's oldest friend, captain of the Coram Vale. "Do you intend to fight them in a place they will not go?" "By giving them a reason to go." Marsh smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We're going to attack a scour-breeding world. Openly. Loudly. We're going to make so much noise that every scour ship in the sector burns toward us at full speed. And then we're going to retreat visibly, desperately, into Telmac 7. The room was very still. "They will follow," said Severin slowly. "They'll follow," Marsh agreed. "Because the scour have one weakness, Admiral, and your records confirm it. They don't think, they react. Show them prey running and they chase. Every time. Every single time. We're going to use that one more time, and we're going to use it to kill them all." He tapped the hollow again. The dust cloud of Telmac 7 lit up with hundreds of small yellow markers. "Mines," he said. "Drone clouds. Sensor-baited torpedoes. 6 months of Earth's industrial capacity, every shipyard, every factory, every kid in a garage who knows how to wire a detonator. We've been building this since the day your fleet arrived." He paused. "We've been building it, honestly, since before then. We just didn't have a reason." Severin stared at him. "How many?" "How many what, sir?" "How many mines?" Marsh thought about it. "Last count, 2,340,000, give or take." The room did not breathe. "There will be losses," Marsh continued, his voice gentler now. "There have to be, bait has to be real. The ships that lure them in will not all come out. I won't lie to you about that, Admiral, and I won't lie to your captains. The lead element will be flying a one-way mission until the moment the trap closes. After that, we'll do everything we can to extract them. Before that," he spread his hands, "they have to bleed, visibly, or the scour will smell the trick." Severin looked at the hollow. He looked at Erie, who was very pale. He looked, finally, at Tessin, who had been at his side for 40 years. "Who flies the bait?" Severin said. "I do," said Marsh. "No," said Severin. "Yes, sir. You are too valuable. You are leading this war, you cannot. Admiral, Marsh's voice was very soft. I have spent 40 years of my life preparing for this fight. I'm not going to ask your people to do something I won't do myself. And I'll tell you something else, if it's me on point, the Scour will commit. They've been watching our engagements. They know my signal. They want me dead more than they want anything else in this sector. If I'm the bait, they will come, and they will come recklessly, and they will die. So, he smiled again, that small, tired smile. It's me. I will fly with you, said Severin. With respect, Admiral, no, you won't. You will lead the trap. Because when the dust settles and the Scour are dead, the coalition is going to need an admiral who can stand in front of 100 worlds and say we did this together. Not a human. You. Severin opened his mouth, closed it. He had not, in all his long life, ever been so thoroughly, gently outmaneuvered. He felt the way Thomas Beck must have felt the day he picked up the broken plasma lance. A man who had thought he understood his own tools and was learning too late that he did not. When Severin asked. 18 days, said Marsh. 18 days later, the refitted Vethari fleet, 81 ships strong now, with 22 human vessels alongside, emerged in the Scour breeding system and opened fire on the hatcheries. The response from the Scour was, in the words of one human officer who would not live to repeat it, biblical. 2,000 ships rose to meet them. Marsh, on the bridge of the bait fleet, watched the swarm boil up out of the planet's atmosphere and turned to his communications officer. Tell the Veyrathel, he said, the door's open. Get the trap ready, we're coming home. Then more quietly, almost to himself. All of us or none of us. The run to Telmac 7 lasted 3 days, and Severin spent every hour of it watching ships die. He stood on the bridge of the Veyrathel, deep inside the dust cloud, and watched the bait fleet's transponders blink out one by one on the long-range holo. The Cairneth II, the Velarin, the Stride of Is. Each blink was a crew of 200. Each blink was a name he had to remember. The humans, hanging in formation around the Veyrathel, watched their own transponders die in equal measure and did not weep. They had been told what this would cost. They had agreed to it anyway. Sir, said Erie very softly, Commander Marsh is still broadcasting. Severin nodded. He did not trust his voice. The Houston's Promise, Marsh's ship, the smallest and fastest of the bait fleet, came tearing through the edge of the dust cloud on the 3rd day with 17 Scour ships clinging to her wake like teeth. Her engines were on fire. Her port nacelle was gone. She was venting atmosphere from a dozen punctures and trailing a long, bright comet of burning coolant, and her transponder was still chirping, defiant and steady. I am here, follow me. Behind her the swarm came. It was not 2,000 ships anymore. It was 1,960-something. Marsh's bait fleet had cost them dearly, even in the running, but it filled the dust cloud's mouth like a tide of black mercury, and Severin felt every officer on the bridge inhale together at the sight. All ships, Severin said. His voice was steadier than he had expected. Hold position. Wait for Commander Marsh's signal. The Houston's Promise tore past the Veyrathel at a relative velocity that should have been impossible for a ship in her condition. On the open channel, Severin heard Marsh laugh, a tired, raw laugh, the laugh of a man who has spent everything and is somehow still standing. Admiral, Marsh said, I'm clear, close the door. Severin closed the door. 2 million mines did not detonate at once. That would have been wasteful. Instead, they detonated in waves, a choreography written by Earth's best minds over 6 months. Each detonation calculated to herd the swarm deeper, to seal the exits, to turn the dust cloud of Telmac 7 from a hiding place into a furnace. The first wave killed 300 Scour ships. The second wave killed 400. The third wave, the largest, the cruelest, a wall of fusion fire that bloomed across the cloud like a sunrise, killed 900 more. The swarm broke. The Scour had never broken, not in 60 years, not in any engagement the coalition had ever recorded. But here, blind and burning, with their numbers halved in 90 seconds. The swarm did the thing the swarm had never done before. They tried to flee. There was nowhere to flee to. The refitted Vethari fleet emerged from the dust on every vector at once, weapons hot, and what followed was not a battle. It was not even a slaughter. It was a closing, the slow, methodical closing of a fist around something that had spent 60 years being the fist itself. Severin stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the species that had murdered his sister, that had eaten his civilization one careful bite at a time, be ground out of existence in the dark. It took 11 hours. When it was done, the dust cloud of Telmec 7 was salted with the cooling wrecks of 2,000 scour ships and 143 coalition vessels. Of the bait fleet, 8 had survived. The Houston's Promise was one of them, drifting now in the lee of the Veyrathal, her hull cracked, her crew alive. Severin found Marsh in the Houston's Promise's medbay, sitting up in a bunk with a bandage around his ribs and a cup of coffee, of course, in his hand. "Admiral," Marsh said. He tried to stand. Severin put a hand on his shoulder gently to keep him seated. "Commander," Severin's voice cracked. He did not care. "On behalf of the Coalition, on behalf of every world that will live because of what you did today, I do not have the words." "Then don't use any, sir," Marsh smiled. "We did it together, that's the only word that matters." Erie Vale was in the doorway. Maya Cortez was beside her, an arm around Erie's shoulders, both of them filthy and exhausted and grinning the wild grins of people who have, against every law of probability, lived. Behind them, through the porthole, the dust cloud of Telmec 7 was beginning to clear, and beyond it, very faint, the first lights of a coalition relief fleet that would, in the years to come, be only the first of many to arrive bearing the joined emblems of the Vethari and Earth. The galaxy that had once mapped humanity as a curious primitive footnote would not map them that way again. Not after Telmec 7. Not after the broken fleet that had limped to Earth begging for mercy and come back leading the war. The coalition